Hello and welcome. Democracy in Africa is being tested as violence escalates in Cote d'Ivoire. So what are the chances this latest crisis could push the country into another civil war? Tens of thousands of people are fleeing the fighting between forces loyal to President Laurent Gbagbo and those who back his rival, Alassane Ouattara. At least 400 people have been killed in violence around the country, and the United Nations says that around 450,000 Ivorians have been forced to abandon their homes since the disputed presidential election last November. Mr. Ouattara was internationally recognized as the winner of that vote, but President Gbagbo has refused to step down. His allies have also rejected a proposal by the African Union to form a unity government led by Mr. Ouattara, and there are now fears the standoff could plunge Cote d'Ivoire into another civil war. So today we ask, what can help resolve the political crisis in Cote d'Ivoire, and does the international community need to get more involved? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or an email. We also welcome your phone calls onto the show. Joining me now from New York is Mantia Diawara, Director of the Institute of Afro-American Affairs at New York University. Professor Diawara says that Laurent Gbagbo must go in order to save his country from political chaos. And here with me in the studio is Augustin Douogi, a senior legal advisor to Mr. Gbagbo in the United States. He believes the president is being unfairly targeted. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Professor Diawara, if I could start with you. So, yeah, good to have you. And I ask, you're one of those who strongly believe that democracy is being challenged by Laurent Gbagbo. And I wonder, what do you see as the consequences of him holding on to power?
Well, you know, Gbagbo is a very well-educated man. He was a professor of history before becoming president. He was also the leader of the opposition in Ivory Coast in the 80s, so we all respect him. Today, the stakes are very high in Ivory Coast because all of Africa is watching Ivory Coast. Should Gbagbo stay, the people will feel that their vote does not mean anything. You vote and the strong men stay in power. We have the same situation in Zimbabwe. We almost had the same situation in Guinea, but luckily for us, the situation was resolved. Now, what we have in Africa today is that elections are being prepared in Niger, Benin, and maybe Senegal is coming up, Nigeria is coming up. Should Gbagbo stay in power, the population will be seriously disappointed.
Does that mean, Professor, do you feel that there would be an impact on the other regional elections you mentioned there?
Absolutely. Ivory Coast is one of the most important countries in Africa. In our region alone, Ivory Coast counts for 40% of the economy, very well-educated people. It was the jewel of West Africa, so the whole continent is actually watching what is going to happen in Ivory Coast.
Okay, thank you. Let me bring in Mr. Augustin Douogi. And I know you believe that President Gbagbo is being unfairly targeted. Why?
Well, first of all, let me say that anybody who is interested in the tragedy happening in Ivory Coast now, who wants to know the truth about it, has to start from this premise, that the election was only a pretext. What is happening in Ivory Coast is not electoral at all, except in name only. There's a good quote from Jacob Zuma, the president of South Africa, who recently said, what happened in Ivory Coast was not an election. But if you consider it an election, then President Gbagbo won. I challenge anybody who said Ouattara won to show what was wrong with the Constitution of the Ivory Coast, why the equivalent of the Supreme Court, having followed the Constitution and declare President Gbagbo the winner, why is that not acceptable? And why is it that after all this gyration and all these killings, people are asking the Constitutional Council, the equivalent of the Supreme Court, to swear in Ouattara. When it declares President Gbagbo the winner, it is not to be believed or taken seriously or accepted. But when they want to force Ouattara on the country, they ask the Constitutional Council to swear him in. It makes absolutely no sense. The real reason that you are watching the tragedy in Ivory Coast is that President Gbagbo, who is a Democrat, is a modern-day Mandela. This man spent 30 years in the opposition. He's not a violent man. He does not have a bank account outside of the Ivory Coast. He doesn't own property anywhere. But his vision is for the true emancipation of Ivory Coast. France is afraid of that because other former colonies would follow his example and France would be the big loser. That is what is at stake in Ivory Coast right now.
Well, let me bring in Professor dIvoire again with an email, sir, if I may. We got this email in from Somalia. And if I could put this to you, Bashir Jama wrote in from Somalia saying, Cote d'Ivoire is experiencing hard times and escalating violence is a sign of regression. The conflict has halted the country's journey to a brighter future and civil war is inevitable if the situation does not improve. Now, what do you see as the worst case scenario for the country, sir? Do you see this being an all-out civil war risk?
Yes, the worst case scenario is also already taking place. People are being targeted in their homes in Ivory Coast. 3 days ago, women marching peacefully were shot dead. 7 of them were dead. They are going from house to house in Abobo. So the worst case scenario is taking place. 400 people have been killed. What else do we want? More than 450,000 people have left Cote d'Ivoire. But to go back to the argument, the constitutional argument, and the argument that the election was just a pretext. If the election was a pretext, it means that Gbagbo is a bad leader because Gbagbo has been in power since 2000. Gbagbo has agreed to the UN mandate to organize the election. He is the strong man in Ivory Coast. The election took place. When the Electoral Commission was just about to declare the result of the elections, Gbagbo's man on television in front of the whole world just snatched the piece of paper from the hand of the people and tore it up. And then when finally the UN, which was mandated by Gbagbo to supervise the election, asked for the result of the elections, Gbagbo puts up his constitutional people who are put in place by him, decided Gbagbo is elected. So it already indicated that Gbagbo is a bad leader if he can't even control the election of the country where he is the president.
Okay, Mr. Dorgi, I'll get Mr. Dorgi to respond to that, but also put you an email on that issue of UN presence. This came from Nigeria, from Khabir Ksalami, who says, I don't understand what UN forces are actually accomplishing in Cote d'Ivoire or what their purpose is. To me, it seems they are simple spectators.
No, I think they are fighting on the side of the rebels. You know, Professor dIvoire mentioned 7 women being killed. This is a typical example of the lies perpetrated by the UN that they can use as an excuse to fight President Gbagbo. The incident he's talking about, the 7 women were not killed. Not one was killed. The tape was edited. It was a machination. And I have a copy of the whole tape. It's all over the place. When you look at the tape, one of the women, who is apparently dead because she's been shot at and she's laying in a pool of blood, she gets up. And one of the rebels said, no, it's not finished yet. Go back down. And you see this woman lying down again in what looks like blood. But this is a video that the world saw.
But most people are so strong.
Let me finish. I listened to you politely when you were talking.
We'll come back to you in a moment, Professor.
Yeah. So, you know, this is a picture that the whole world saw. The truth came out later, but it was too late. But I'll give you an even more telling example. The UN Security Council representative accused President Gbagbo of having Belarus deliver helicopter to Ivory Coast in violation of the embargo on arms. It was false. Belarus protested violently, and finally a public apology was issued by the United Nations to Belarus. But in the meantime, the damage had been done because the UN was using this as reason to put reinforcement behind its peacekeeping force. They are not peacekeeping. They want Ouattara to be president because France wants that to happen.
Well, I'll get on to the reasoning there behind in a second. Let me get back to Professor Diawara and ask you, sir, you wanted to respond, and then I'll get an email to you, sir.
Well, my argument is Gbagbo has been buying tapes like France Afrique to show that France is manipulating the elections. Now, if Gbagbo has a tape showing that these women were now really killed, you know that tape will be all around YouTube, will be all around the world. It's not enough to say it. How come we have not seen it the same way we've seen the woman dead on the ground? How come we're not seeing it? Are you saying that YouTube is not working? Are you saying that the television are refusing your images? You and I are on Al Jazeera now, so it's not. If you could find a place to show it, if it's true.
I think you were saying it's available, Mr.
Are we glad to send a copy of it to the professor?
No, don't be glad, show it.
But you know,
you know.
No. But you see, this is why at the beginning of the show, I said anybody who wants to know the truth has to consider this not an electoral thing. Look at the massive power, United States, United Nations, and France. They have intoxicated all the major papers.
Let me ask you,
in Europe. They take the side of Ouattara.
Let me ask you why you think they would like Mr. Ouattara to be president.
Here's the reason. Ivory Coast is very rich. And as I told you earlier, President Gbagbo's vision of running Ivory Coast involved total emancipation, freedom to deal with all comers. France does not accept that because it will mean renation for them. Ouattara is not from Ivory Coast. Ouattara and I came here in this country. I think I said that on your show earlier. We came here in 1962 on a scholarship program. There were 2 of them, including him, from Burkina Faso. And there were 3 of us, including me, from Ivory Coast. Now, if he can be made president of Ivory Coast, he does not care really what happens to the people there. In exchange, the people who back him can do what they want in Ivory Coast. Okay. This is what is at stake.
Right. We'll ask more in a moment. Let me get a caller on the line. John has been waiting patiently to join us here in D.C. John, go ahead, please.
Thank you. They both seem to have good arguments. My point is there is an international criminal court. That court needs to be empowered to settle such disputes. Also, in Libya, Gaddafi should be brought before a criminal court. Israel should be brought before a criminal court.
Okay.
And once we have enforcement and accountability, then this won't happen so much. The other thing is in most of these places, if you follow the money trail, secret banking allows corruption to take place.
All right, John, thank you. Good point for us to consider. Now, let me get an email to Professor Diawara here, touching on what John said as well here. Professor Getun Mosisa wrote in saying, any action by the international community would make matters worse. It is better for Gbagbo and Ouattara to negotiate an exit strategy from the chaos before it's too late. Both sides need to put Cote d'Ivoire's peace, integrity and survival first. What chance do you believe there is of real negotiation at this stage?
Well, Gbagbo's side just refused the negotiation that was recommended by the African Union. So here is the problem. Mr. Dogu is engaging in the same kind of contradictions that Gbagbo's side has been making all along. He says that Ouattara is not from Ivory Coast. Now, if Ouattara is not from Ivory Coast, why did Gbagbo accept to run against Ouattara? Why did Gbagbo go on television to debate Ouattara and call him my brother and wish him good luck in the elections? Now, Ouattara wins the election, suddenly Ouattara, the old argument of ivoirité is coming back again. I went to school with him. That has no relevance to this argument. So that's the first contradiction. The other problem is the following. Africans today have to let go of this victim syndrome. You know, Americans are doing this, French people are doing this. I really feel embarrassed. Anybody who knows my work, I feel embarrassed to be defending either imperialism or France in the maneuvers in Africa, because I'm against it just like Mr. Dogu. But we can't play the victim game all along. We cannot have this kind of heart of darkness narrative. If I don't win the election, I hold the whole country, I hijack the country. If people die, I don't care. We have to get past of that and give Africa a chance.
Okay, Professor, let me put an email to you and give you a chance to respond, Mr. Dwogi. And this came in from Ola Johnson Olewarabaju from Nigeria, who says, the power to determine whether a politician stays in office lies with the electorate. The electorate in Cote d'Ivoire decided last November that Gbagbo must leave. He should respect the will of the people. Now, I wonder, listening to what the professor said about his willingness to run against Mr. Ouattara, is, again, the reasons.
Here is a reason. Again, go back to the beginning. I said Mr. Gbagbo is considered dangerous for France. That's why this is happening. President Gbagbo won the election in 2000. 2 years later, before he implemented his program, the French had trained rebels in Burkina Faso to overthrow the regime. This is how this whole mess started. Now, fast forward, the reason that the rebellion arose was they said they wanted Ouattara to be president of Ivory Coast. The coup d'etat failed, it turned into a rebellion. That's when, and this responds to Professor Diawara's question, this is when President Gbagbo went on national television and he said the reason that we are being destabilized is because in 2000 the Supreme Court refused for Ouattara to be candidate because he's not Ivorian. Article 48 of the Ivory Coast Constitution gives me special powers in consultation with the Supreme Court to make this kind of decision. I am deciding that he should be allowed to run in order for us to have peace. He has made a lot of concession, and the answer is he did it for peace. He did it for peace. But having allowed Mr. Ouattara to run does not suppose that if he commits massive fraud, one should let him be president. Why is it? Why is it that if he's so popular, when he says to the people, go in the street and demonstrate, they don't. When he says strike, they don't. But the armed forces are behind Gbagbo, the young people are behind Gbagbo, the population is behind Gbagbo. You would have thought that with what's happening in Egypt, North Africa, that if people really did not want Gbagbo, they'd be in the street, especially since they have the UN there.
Well, considering that, I'll get Professor Diawara, considering that the situation with the United Nations and the African Union, let me ask you to answer an email that came from the United Kingdom, from Fiaz Yunus in Birmingham, who wrote in saying, what is the African Union doing about the situation? Wasn't the AU supposed to be pressuring Gbagbo to step down? And I wonder, in your opinion, what clout the African Union has in this situation?
Well, you know, soon after Ouattara won the election and he was recognized as the winner, as the new president, Gbagbo and his ministers began to threaten the neighboring countries. You know, Ivory Coast is, Mr. Dwogi is absolutely right. It's a very wealthy country. It has been a very welcoming country in the region, so that you have more than, you know, you have several Ghanaians, several Malians, several Nigerians, several Guineans, Senegalese, Burkina Faso. So soon after the election, Gbagbo's people began to say, if this does not resolve in our favor, your population will be in danger in Ivory Coast. This is why Ghana cannot say a word. All the neighboring countries are watching, but they cannot make a... Burkina is silent, Mali is silent. All these countries have to be silent because the people from the population from their countries are in Ivory Coast.
Okay.
That's what.
All right. Professor, I'll get back to you in a second. I want to get Mr. Dwogi in just a second, but I also want to get Peter on the line from Virginia to join us with a question or comment. Go ahead, Peter.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
I would like Mr. Doe, this is just advice to Mr. Doe. Mr. Doe, please, you guys should take, a lesson from Ghana. Mr. Rawlings was in power for 18 years. After his party lost, they gave forward to the position. They were there for 8 years. They also lost. It's just less than a point. And they gave forward to the opposition again. Look at how Ghana is flourishing right now. Please,
okay,
give Ivory Coast a chance.
Okay, Mr. Dogi, the response from our viewer there, Peter, is saying that, look, you know, we've seen in other countries the change of leadership often allows a country to flourish.
Again, this bears repeating. Since we began this program, nobody has told you that constitutionally something was wrong with the result. They haven't told you that the Constitutional Council is not empowered to announce the result. There is nothing like that. All we are hearing is, let power pass.
Okay.
Gbagbo did not fight in the opposition for 30 years. When he has finally got the constitutional order in the country, to abandon that because there is pressure on him. This is what people are saying. So what will happen tomorrow? If tomorrow Mr. Ouattara is president, and then another rebellion starts, and it has, for some reason, wide support from outside, he should resign. Is that what we call democracy?
Could there be another election? Could it be restaged? What are the problems right now?
President Gbagbo has said, for example, he said, come and recount the votes.
What about restaging the election completely? If it's
They could do that. But you see, the problem is this. Mr. Ouattara knows that if the elections are free and fair, he cannot possibly win. This is why the rebels in the northern part of the country did not disarm. Imagine a polling station where there are supposed to be 2 representatives for each candidate voting, that you go there and the incumbent has 0 votes. You have voting stations in the north where there were more votes for Ouattara than there were people registered to vote. This goes on and on. Earlier, somebody mentioned the African Union. They were eager to go in, some of them even to remove Gbagbo. But when they go and they're presented with the evidence, it's overwhelming.
okay?
They are forced to retreat.
Well, Professor dIvoire, let me ask you this, apart from listening to what Mr. Dogi has to say and responding to that, let me ask you what the situation goes as far as the rebels fighting now, because Mr. Ouattara has apparently distanced himself somewhat from the rebels. So who's driving the conflict right now?
Who's driving the conflict right now? I think that there are people in Ivory Coast and who believe that Gbagbo will never leave without power, without war. This is what is driving the conflict. And they basically are trying to respond to Gbagbo with power, which I think they're wrong. Now, the problem is that we can't dwell in contradictions. Gbagbo was the president of Ivory Coast. It means that Gbagbo controls the country. Gbagbo authorizes the elections. For Gbagbo to say, or somebody, a supporter of Gbagbo to say, if the elections were fair or were transparent, it's an indication that Gbagbo must be incompetent already if he can make sure that the elections are fair and transparent in his own country where he is the president.
Okay.
This is one problem. He also said that the constitutional question was not addressed. Nobody addressed it. I addressed it when we first began talking. Gbagbo's people on national television tore up the election result in front of everybody. And
Professor,
yes.
yeah, I'm sorry, I'm going to give you 30 seconds, Mr. Dogi, before the end of the show, just to respond to that. The idea that the document was torn up and...
That was very easy. There had been no consensus reached. In fact, the fellow brandished that for the same reason that the Constitutional Council announced the result after the delay and so on, because they knew that once they announced it, no matter how fraudulently, the international community would run with it. That's why the guy did that.
Well, unfortunately, Mr. Dogi and Professor dIvoire, we're out of time, but I thank you very much for joining us with your comments there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us, and
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dogi. Nice meeting you.
Gentlemen, I have to thank our viewers also for being with us with their questions. Now, remember, you can watch a podcast of the show on iTunes. Today, we're featuring our conversation with Muslim commentator Sheikh Hamza Yusuf on the controversial congressional hearings investigating claims of radicalization of American Muslims. On the next show, Reaching Out, US President Barack Obama visits Latin America to forge new alliances across the continent. But how can the US rebuild influence in a region it's lost over the past decade? Be sure to tune in for that. From me and the team, we'll see you next time.